former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in the Obama White House. Joel, good morning to you. Wonderful to see you this morning. Let's start with the raid for people who are, tuned out on a summer weekend, just waking up to this news. These four hostages rescued. This clearly was something that, Israeli families of hostages have been increasingly more and more upset about the fact that their loved ones have remained in captivity. What does this mean for them?
Yeah, it was a dramatic rescue, without a doubt, and at a very high cost, as you described, with a Palestinian loss of life. What it means is that the Israeli Defense Forces, for a day, for a moment, restored confidence in the Israeli public about their capacity to deliver and to get their people out. But in the big picture, the best way to get Israeli hostages out has been through deals, through a ceasefire for hostage exchange, like one that we saw back in November. So a good day for Israeli unity. It didn't last long. Obviously, the politics in Israel are very dicey, with Benny Gantz now exiting the coalition government. But it was something that the Israeli public has been demanding, and now they want more action. They want to see the prime minister lean in on getting a deal to get these hostages out.
Of course, the toll here was very high in terms of Palestinian life. It also served to highlight some of the tactics that Hamas uses.
That's right.
Talk a little bit more about where these hostages were found and why there was perhaps so much collateral damage. Obviously, much of it should be laying at the feet of the Israeli forces that invaded here. But that's not the only thing at play.
Not at all, Kasie. And you're right. It was a despicable display of how Hamas devalues Palestinian life. To be very clear, these hostages were held in private civilian homes. They were there for months, and they were in the midst of what everyone in those areas knew was a civilian area. So Israel, by finding these individuals, by rescuing them, it was clear that there were going to be civilian casualties. Hamas doesn't care about Palestinian civilian life. I know we've talked about this before, but this is perhaps one of the most stark examples of that. If they cared about Palestinian civilian life, they would be agreeing to the ceasefire proposal that has been out there and discussed. Secretary Blinken's going out to the region to try to push for this. But in the meantime, Hamas is embedding hostages in civilian areas with the clear understanding this will cost Palestinian civilian lives. For a propaganda bonus, maybe for Hamas, but I don't see how this is a real bonus for anybody in the middle of this conflict. They clearly are not looking at civilians as something to protect inside of Gaza.
So let's talk big picture for a second. You mentioned Benny Gantz, of course, announcing over the weekend that he's going to leave the war cabinet. He is, of course, someone that the U.S. has really relied on in the course of these negotiations and this push for a ceasefire that President Biden actually announced on a recent Friday. Here's what Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, had to say over the weekend. Let's watch.
He thinks the best way to get all of the hostages home is in a deal where they're brought out diplomatically, where there's no need for military operations to get every last hostage out. What we would much prefer to see is a ceasefire where the hostages come out peacefully. That is available. Israel has said yes to it. Now Hamas needs to say yes to it. That's where President Biden's full effort, energy, and attention is.
So bottom line, Joel, what's the holdup?
Well, the holdup is Hamas. The holdup is that Hamas does not want to agree to a ceasefire that essentially pushes them out of power. And that's the genius of this proposal, which is that it lays out a roadmap for preventing, at the end state, a resurgence of Hamas in the Gaza Strip. And now that is, of course, very frustrating as well to the White House, because what we're seeing is the far-right ministers in Israel's government rejecting that proposal as well. And now with Benny Gantz leaving the coalition, it gives them a little more power in the near term. But it also puts the question to the Israeli public, and I think this is why the president did go public with his proposal, to get the Israeli public to recognize the stakes, to put it back in the political arena, this question about how to end this war in a manner that we don't see a Hamas resurgence in Gaza. And so the holdup right now is that Hamas understands that this proposal is against their interests. And that's why we see the secretary going out. That's why it's frustrating that it's not yet done. But Hamas, they're hoping for more days of violence, like on Saturday, where they don't have to make this agreement. And that means more Palestinian lives are put at risk.
All right, Joel Rubin for us this morning. Joel, always appreciate you. Thanks very much for being here.